anatomically modern humans came out of Africa and spread in different part of the world, or at least Eurasia and Africa. Then where from these people have come? As I have mentioned in the previous question, that in all probability, as per my assessment, post-glacial period genetic identities originated on the Bengal-Myanmar coast during the last glacial period, that we are completely missing that pre-glacial period genetic identities are present in Andaman Archipelago. We can always imagine a migration path, but that will, unless that migration path is compatible with the available genetic data, that path is completely meaningless. At the global level, it will not be able to withstand the global scrutiny. So about 50 years back, when I went to Northeast India from Calcutta, I realized that each state is so different from one another. That was the first time I realized that this diversity cannot be explained locally. We are not the first migration along the sea was not by ship but on foot. We, as I have mentioned, a sort of transformation or refinement of civilization was going on Bengal-Myanmar coast, where the post-glacial period genetic identities originated. Now you have to understand that India is possibly the most diverse country in the world. Probably its diversity is much more than other continents. How it has happened? It has happened because lot of reverse migration community from different region have returned to India.
Namaste and a very warm welcome. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Tilak Ranjan Bera is with us, and so in short, if I can say about his knowledge or his research, it would take at least half an hour to explain about his research works actually. So in short, I will say it, and so he is an explorer, and he joined in Indian Army years back, and he was exploring the Indian subcontinent as well as many parts of Europe, Egypt, and many places as well. And he has written a book called as India in Egypt. Today we are going to discuss a lot about this, and today we'll touch about this another book also, that is Exploring Northeast. He has a pictorial representation of all his books over there in his book called as Exploring Northeast, and he has written a book on Ladakh, he has written a book on Goa. Namaste sir, it's a pleasure hosting you actually.
Namaste.
And I must tell you that the work which you have done is quite amazed, because in depth of all these things, and you have presented so much of various evidence in this thing actually. Thank you so much for appearing in our podcast, sir. Thank you so much. I welcome you.
I'm also feeling honored. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Sir, India in Egypt. So, where did you got this idea of writing this book called as India in Egypt, sir? Because many people have been writing books on India in various subcontinents as well. But Egypt, it was, I think I'm hearing it for the first time from your side and your views. I thought I've seen various presentation of yours as well. Then I came to know, okay, India is in Egypt actually. So, how did you got an idea of writing this book, sir, India in Egypt?
That's a long story. For almost since childhood, I was fascinated by the diversity of Indian subcontinent, and at some stage I was exploring as much as possible of every corner of Indian subcontinent. When I was exploring Northeast India, at that time, I realized that there are some evidences which are definitely establishing a connectivity with the Mediterranean region / Red Sea region. Like in Tejpur, in a 6th century temple, we have Hellenistic art. Actually, this has been identified by the archaeologists, but nobody is explaining how in a 6th century temple Hellenistic art can be explained. Historically, there is no record. Similarly, I came to know that even the ancestral memorials of the Ahom dynasty, which are known as Maidems now, they are located in Charaidao near Shivsagar. They are structurally and functionally very similar to pyramids. Of course, the size is much smaller. And then I came to know that Israel has given visa to thousands of Mizos, considering them as one of the lost tribes. All these evidences, various types, one is archaeological, one is genetic. Obviously, Israel has given visa after genetic confirmation. Another archaeological is this Maidems. That prompted me that there was an ethnic ancient connectivity between Red Sea or Mediterranean region with Northeast region. So then I thought we can't only think, I think we have to explore that end, that is the Mediterranean region, Red Sea region, to collect ground evidences. Otherwise, it will remain very vague that probably we had an connectivity. Then I started exploring that end, starting with Egypt, because I'm a retired defense officer, so my budget was limited. So I realized that Egypt is one location where the entire civilization is along one single river, that is Nile River. That region, much more in a more economical manner, because in Europe everything is scattered all over a very vast territory, whereas in Egypt everything is located in a very small region. So then I visited Egypt and realized that actually there are many ground evidence which almost confirms this connectivity. I read a lot about Egyptian civilization, what is there. I studied each and every structure. I analyzed each and every structure, and then I was convinced that not only there was an intense connectivity between India and Egypt, but actually it became almost evident when we analyzed the genetic data. Then it became clear that possibly the post-glacial period genetic identities had spread from India to Egypt. In that way, probably Indian origin people had established Egyptian civilization, and that was in this book, India in Egypt, I made an attempt to establish that in a taking a multidisciplinary approach. That is how that is the background of writing this book. Before that, I was writing about various little known territories of India. As he mentioned, one of my book is on Northeast India, because I realized that we know so little and it is almost impossible to get authentic information about all 7 states in one book. So I took quite some time to explore that region and then compile the historical records and whatever was possible about each state, and with visuals, that is for the photographic evidence of each state. That was the outcome. This book that is exploring the Northeast India, the 7 pristine states of India, that is the background of that. And then about Ladakh, about Andaman, Nicobar, pre-Portuguese Goa, because there are books about every part of India, but there are some regions which are not very authentically recorded. So we decided that I will publish books only about those places where the information of which regions are not easily available, and that is where I concentrated on these little known territories. Published books only on these regions only.
Understood, sir. Sir, this brings us to a question of how old the Indian civilization is, so if you tell about India and Egypt, we'll come to the Mesopotamian civilization or the Indian civilization or Mesopotamian civilization versus the Indian civilization in the later part. But before going to that, tell us about how old is the Indian civilization, sir?
This is a very good question, because we have to start from there. It has already been established that the anatomical we belong to Homo sapiens, that is, in short, they are known as anatomically modern humans. It is already accepted that these anatomically modern humans came out of Africa and spread in different part of the world. So we have to start when did this anatomical modern human reached India? Generally accepted view is the group which came out of Africa 65,000 years ago, they have actually survived. It is possible that before that also anatomical modern human came out of Africa, but in all probability there is no continuation of those species, in the sense even if they have come out of Africa, but they have not survived. Whereas those anatomical modern human which came out of Africa 65,000 years ago, they have survived. So this particular move is known as out of Africa move, and generally they migrated along the coast of Arabia and then Western India, Eastern India, and went all along to Australia. This migration is popularly known as Great Coastal Migration. So we have to start that anatomical modern human reached India 65,000 years ago, and since then they have permanently lived in India. Now, on what basis we are saying that since then they have lived here permanently? Because they managed to enter Andaman archipelago, where they got trapped. They have genetic analysis of those groups suggests that the first group definitely entered there about 50,000 years ago. And further genetic analysis of Andaman archipelago aboriginal tribes suggests there are presently two groups, and possibly they belong to different period. Well, nobody is discussing that in detail, but one of the paper I know, Dr. Vishwanath Sarkar, who was part of that study from Anthropological Survey of India, who they have found at least two groups in Andaman. And my opinion, my view is, I got an opportunity to actually very intensely study these different groups, and it appears that Jarwaonge Sentinelese possibly belong to one group, whereas Great Andaman is belong to the other group, which entered Andaman at a later date, maybe 16 to 20,000 years ago. Unfortunately, not many people are discussing how did they enter there. So that is another issue which we have to understand the antiquity of Indian civilization. How old is Indian civilization? Because then comes the main issue: who are the present generation? They are post-glacial period genetic identities who emerged on the root or the landmass which gets connected with Andaman. So here comes the major issue which we have to seriously think, that post-glacial period genetic identity, which includes R1 alpha, R1 bravo, and O haplogroup, possibly originated on the Bengal-Myanmar coast, which gets connected with Andaman, and submersion of that landmass resulted in spread of these genetic identities in the rest of the world. So that is a big issue which remains very little discussed at Indian level as well as at global level. I would say there is no discussion on this major issue which is in our favor, and I personally feel that we must concentrate to understand where the post-glacial period genetic identities emerged. Now coming to your actual question, how old is our civilization? I would say that in this landmass, Bengal-Myanmar landmass, which lasted for about 10,000 years during the glacial period, lot of advancement of knowledge, skill, language went on, and here is the place and this is the time that is between 10,000 and 20,000 years ago, which is the birthplace of modern civilization, and from here it spread. So by my definition, by my assessment, actually we can say, because before that primitive people were definitely there in India, but I don't think we can call that a civilization. Primitive people had lived in India. We have a lot of evidences, especially in Andaman and also south of India Parbat, but their lifestyle is not defined as civilization. So Indian civilization, we can say, actually originated during the last glacial period on the Bengal-Myanmar coast between 10,000 and 20,000 years.
Yes, sir. Sir, as far as while we are reading in the school textbook, I think the things which you have discovered, I think the Indian education system hasn't gone to that extent to touch the place which we have researched. But as far as we have read in school text, we heard about Mesopotamian civilization, Indus Valley civilization, or we can say Indian civilization also. But which is the oldest civilization, sir? Mesopotamian or the Indian civilization? Or where did the Mesopotamian civilization arrived, or where did it originated? And then we'll talk about the Indian civilization in detail. So, which is older one, sir? Whether it is Mesopotamian or the Indian civilization, sir?
This is the main issue, because we still believe that the cradle of civilization is where the civilization actually emerged, that is Sumer and Sumeria and Mesopotamian region, and a particular another territory is known as Fertile Crescent. These are the regions where it's in the eastern coastal Mediterranean region. So now, why we are actually missing, though Western world has identified the oldest civilization there, but it has not originated there because of way of presenting it. If that is the place of origin of civilization or modern civilization, then the genetic identities found there would have spread to, let us say, Europe and to India and to Egyptian region. But what we see is their present genetic identity is J1, J2, and that has not spread to either Egypt to that extent, or to actually that has not spread to Europe and to India to that extent, to explain that they have spread with their civilization to these regions. Other issue is actually we have to now identify if it is not the site of origin of the post-glacial period genetic identities like R1 alpha, R1 bravo and O which are actually seen spread all over the world, or at least Eurasia and Africa, then where from these people have come. As I have mentioned in the previous question, that in all probability, as per my assessment, post-glacial period genetic identities originated on the Bengal-Myanmar coast during the last glacial period. Rudimentary civilization formed there. As they spread to different regions, they took their knowledge, their skill, and actually developed these old civilizations, which are known as the ancient civilizations, which includes your Mesopotamia and Sumer, Egyptian civilization, and ancient Greek civilization. By my assessment, actually, when the Indian origin peoples were going from here or Indian region to Egyptian direction, Red Sea direction, that one of the interim place civilization which formed the Sumer, and when they were traveling from India, pivoting Kailash towards Europe or Turkey and Europe, the civilization which emerged on the route is Mesopotamian civilization. So, by my definition, actually, Indian origin people established those civilizations, or spread of Indian origin people to different direction resulted in some interim locations which we have identified as Indus Valley civilization, Sumerian civilization, and Mesopotamian civilization. So, obviously, Indian civilization is older because you have to first identify where the post-glacial period genetic identities originated. Obviously, the modern civilization actually spread from there. So the main issue we have to settle first is where the post-glacial period genetic identities originated during the last glacial period.
Okay, sir. Sir, the origin of Indian civilization, where did it originated? And we talked about the years and something like that. But how did it originated, sir? As we call it as the Indian civilization, we call it as a Mesopotamian civilization. We spoke about something like that. And where did the Indian civilization originated, and how did the origin began, sir? Actually,
as I'm repeatedly mentioning, that we are completely missing that pre-glacial period genetic identities are present in Andaman Archipelago. So, post-glacial period genetic identities has to originate in the close by region or at a place where these anatomical modern human, pre-glacial period anatomical modern humans continuously survived. What we see here is the available genetic data suggests that one is pre-glacial period genetic identities are still almost in pure form available in Andamans, and all three post-glacial period genetic identities like R1 alpha, R1 bravo and O haplogroup is present on the Bengal coast. So it suggests that anatomical modern human definitely survived along the eastern coastal India. And now, as we mentioned that the Bengal-Myanmar coast is the site which is most likely place where post-glacial period genetic identities originated. So they established a civilization along the coastal region of India, particularly Indian coastal region. And as the seawater increased, this coastal Indian civilization got submerged. So it is not that easy for us to display archaeological sites which similar archaeological evidences which are present in Sumer, Mesopotamia, Egypt and Greece that look, this was our oldest. I mean, this civilization is older than that because that has got submerged. Now, incidentally, there are few accidental discovery of submerged settlements all along Indian coast, like Gulf of Combat Cultural Complex, and very recently some work is going on about Dwarka. So that confirms that in the coastal region, Indian civilization emerged, developed, and which is the oldest in the world because these regions have submerged at least 10,000 years ago. Of course, Dwarka probably submerged little later, but Gulf of Combat, the depth at which we find these settlements confirms that probably Gulf of Combat cultural complex which we have identified or detected, but that was an accidental discovery. We are not really doing enough marine archaeological exploration as yet to search which are the other settlements which are submerged in the coastal Indian territory. And especially we have not done much organized study along eastern coastal territory to find. So even if this territory, which we are an imaginary territory that is Bengal-Myanmar coast, where people lived for 10,000 years during the last glacial period and which are submerged, we have to search in this region. And because we are not understanding where to search, because nobody, then we have to go by the available genetic data. It appears that this region has remained completely undiscussed and unexplained. Why do we have all three genetic identities in, let us say, Bengal region or on the western coast of that Bengal-Myanmar coastal shelf, glacial coastal shelf. That shelf forms only during the glacial period and is submerged. So today that is not there. So we are unable to show the world archaeological evidences that we have an older civilization because that has submerged. And as I mentioned, one has already been identified, located, but adequate study probably has not been done or not been discussed. At least we don't know exactly what did they found there. I mean, because that was detected 20 years back, but what was the outcome of that? What was the present status that they have identified? How long? I mean, what are the archaeological evidences that we are not discussing? That is not coming in our. So, though we can, from other evidences like archaeological and genetic evidences suggest that Indian civilization was the oldest, but there is no study in this line because we are unable to form an idea where to search and what had happened, possible events of the pre-recorded period. Genetic and archaeological evidences are suggesting this, but we are not yet able to form an idea what were the sequence of events, where did this post-glacial period genetic identities form, and along which route they spread, and what are the evidences of that.
Understood, sir. Sir, there is a separate topic, I think, tracing Indian history through genetics in your book. Can you explain us about the process in detail, sir? Because everything is genetics. Because one relation to the other can be traced through genetics. But how did you manage to frame this topic, or how did you get to know that how Indian history is traced to genetics, sir?
Well, whatever we think in the sense we can always imagine a migration path, but that will, unless that migration path is compatible with the available genetic data, that path is completely meaningless. At the global level, it will not be able to withstand the global scrutiny. I'm not a geneticist. I'm only a postgraduate in medical science, but genetics is, to some extent, we have to study genetics, though not migration genetics, but anyway, I consider that unless we try to understand all aspects of the Indian civilization, probably we will not be able to derive at the right conclusion. That is, if we are claiming Indian civilization is old, we have to explain that to the rest of the world that it is compatible with the scientific subjects or data of the scientific subjects, of which genetics is the most important subject now available to us to establish which civilization is the oldest, or where the post-glacial period genetic identities originated and how did they spread. So we have global maps of all three genetic identities, R1 alpha, R1 bravo, and O haplogroup, which spread in which region of the world. But nobody is explaining from these maps how do we identify the site of origin of all three. And then we have to explain that if we are saying that it has originated in the Bengal-Myanmar coast, then the present maps are actually compatible with a migration from that point. So that is where I concentrated. As I mentioned, though I'm not geneticist, but these are obvious data and it needs a definite explanation and discussion at the national and global level. That why are we finding these genetic data in these pockets in India, and how do we explain that? Because these has been generated by the Western world and published and easily available in internet today. These maps which we are discussing are actually easily available today. I thought these genetic data are to some extent in our favor. That is, it suggests, you can say even confirms, that the post-glacial period genetic identities migrated from India, eastern coast of India or Bengal-Myanmar region as it submerged, and then we can explain, and then that migration path is again compatible with other subjects. We find archaeological evidences, linguistic evidences, then falling into place, and that gets explained. And that is why in this book I have given so many maps to specifically describe exactly along which path they have migrated and what are the evidences along those paths. And see, this book was published 3-4 years back. In this 3-4 years, I have refined my knowledge further. That there were there were trans-Himalayan migration routes, but along the coast also. So now, in the next discussion, next books, probably I will come up with further evidences which will almost confirm that what we are discussing is not baseless, and actually we have no option but to seriously consider that.
Okay, sir. So, throughout your research time, or I think you have been, you told me that you have been traveling for the past 50 years, right, sir? At what point of the time you come to know that Indians have been migrated to Egypt, and so at which point of your research time you got to know this, sir? Let us speak about the Indian migration in detail, sir.
50 years. Actually, I love traveling all over the Indian territory. So about 50 years back, when I went to Northeast India from Calcutta, I realized that each state is so different from one another. That was the first time I realized that this diversity cannot be explained locally. Obviously, something has happened which we are not understanding. That has resulted in this diversity, because each state, their religion is different, their physical feature is different, and their characteristic is so different, their culture is so different. So it is very unlikely that this has happened locally. And then the view is that they have come from farther east. Whereas when I explored Northeast India much later, let us say 10-15 years back, for quite some time, for 6-7 years, I was exploring only Northeast. Then I realized we have features which directly suggest that these people may have come from Red Sea and Mediterranean region. So my it started forming that probably we are not understanding the complexity of the Indian population, that they have come from different region or they have gone from here. Then I included genetics in my study. That gave me that actually Indian origin people had traveled to the Mediterranean region and Red Sea region during the post-glacial period first, and at a later date they are coming back. When they are coming back, the evidences are completely different, and when they are coming back from Europe, they are coming back with some very specific physical feature, and that is easily detectable. So that is why we have more of this controversy or confusion that Aryan have come from that side, or actually this Aryan, whomsoever we are identifying as Aryans, that is their physical feature to some extent matches with the Eastern European territory or Black Sea and Red Sea Mediterranean region. They were actually reverse migration Indian origin fraternities. And from here, when the communities went to both Red Sea region and Mediterranean or Eastern Europe, they went with oral or spoken language. At that time, there was no script. Whereas when they are coming back, then often they are coming back with a script and they are writing in that language at that time. So it is appearing that language is coming from west to east, but actually that is the written form of Sanskrit. Let us say we can clearly see that one language, that is with R1 alpha, went towards Eastern Europe 6,000 years ago. By the genetic data, we can specify that migration happened about 5,600, 5,800 to 6,000 ago, because that is the time of submersion of the Bengal-Myanmar coast also. One phase, that is the last phase or the third phase. Now, when these people went to Eastern Europe, they went with oral or spoken Sanskrit language. that from that language, Indo-European language form possibly. I mean, that served, that spoken Indian origin language, particularly oral spoken Sanskrit, served as the Proto-Indo-European language from which the Indo-European group of family or family of languages emerged. And when they are coming back, some reverse migration Indo-European languages are coming back, and we are now very sure that this linguistic group is continuous from India to Europe. Now, we have to understand that originally it had gone from Bengal Myanmar coast in spoken form, and that is, we cannot prove in script because that was a pre-script period. And when they are coming back, then it is getting recorded because now they are coming back with script. So now it appears, because that has happened much later, it is much easily detectable, and that gives an impression that actually Indo-European language came from west to east. Indo-Europeans or so-called Aryans came from west to east, but actually their ancestors had traveled from east to west much earlier, which can only be detected by the genetic, at this stage, by genetic analysis, that we have possibly older R1 alpha, or R1 alpha had traveled from here to west first, or to Eastern Europe first, and at a later date it has come back. Similarly, towards Red Sea region and towards Mediterranean, southern Mediterranean region, the other group, that is R1 Bravo, had traveled with the pre-Sanskrit language, which we can identify as Pali, Prakrita, Proto-Bengali, or Mundari. So these are the original languages of the Bengal-Myanmar coast, and R1O haplogroup and R1 Bravo possibly traveled with these languages. And I feel that when the Pali speakers settled in the Eastern Mediterranean region, they named their settlement as Palistan, which is now known as Palestine. Similarly, Kirat fraternity, when they settled there in the Mediterranean, one of the Mediterranean island, that island was known as Kirat. And now it is known as Crete, where actually Minoan civilization emerged of ancient Greece. Now we have to gradually give quite some importance to these names, which at this stage may not be taken seriously. It's difficult for people to accept that these names are Indian origin names, but when we genetically establish that the Indian origin people had settled in this region, because we can establish the migration path, we can establish the routes, then gradually you have to accept that when they had traveled with their language and culture. So we can expect that Indian deities and Indian gods and goddesses would emerge there. Of course, they're in different avatar, So they are not called by the same name, but you can actually establish a connectivity. Possibly this deity is the manifestation of this Indian deity. And similarly, there are names which you have to accept, because if they have gone from India, they will possibly name their settlements by Indian names. And then at this stage, nobody is considering that Indian people had established those civilizations, so they are not considering these names. But over a period of time, when we understand that there are enough evidence to seriously consider that the initial migration from east to west, then you have to accept that these people actually traveled with their language and culture. So even this language and culture is expected there. So, see, it is not that I'm just associating that Palistan name with Pali language. Obviously, in all probability, Pali was an Indian origin language. Now, it is not that I'm just associating that Palistan name with Pali language speakers. Let us say these people were Pali speakers, so their settlement they named, because they were Pali speakers, Palistan. Okay. Now, that my discussion does not end there. Now, when I am reading India in Greece by E. Pocock, published from London in 1860s, there he mentions that the ancient language of Greece was Pelasgian, and they had come from a territory of Pallas flower, and he is describing that Pallas flower description, which he collected this description from Asiatic Society research papers, and he is describing elaborately why that language was known as Pelasgian, and that today we find that in the eastern coastal territory, or what is known as Jongol Mohol, there are a lot of Pallas flowers, exceptional number of Pallas trees in the region. That region becomes completely red during this period, that is March, April. So that is matching. So we can consider that was the Pali language speakers actually reached there. And then, as I mentioned, even an island name as Kirat. Now, we can think, why are you calling that as that Crete name originated from Kirat? Now, my point is, if you see very critically Ptolemy's map, which he has drawn about Ganga Ridhi, you will find that he is marking a territory east of Ganga Ridhi as Kirat Desh, possibly referring to Kirat Desh. So it is confirmed that Mediterranean region people, Ptolemy's map was possibly drawn in when the sailors from Alexandria or Red Sea region were coming to Bay of Bengal. Now, obviously they knew that this is the territory of Kirat Desh. So obviously that Kirat name was known to them. So that gives me you can say an opportunity to guess, in that case the Crete name possibly originated from the word Kirat. And probably these people were short, that is why the English term Cretan has come from there, again from Kirat. So I've discussed everything what I think, because associating these words and this with the present day names, whether you accept that at this stage is we have to see. But once I managed to establish that the genetic data suggests that the migration was from east to west, then you have to take it much more seriously.
Okay, sir. So I have a small doubt over here, sir. Since you said the early migration was through Trans-Himalayan region, at that time, did we have the sea routes, or it was discovered? Was it discovered later, sir?
No, you have to understand this. What this term sea route means by ship. We are not the first migration along the sea was not by ship but on foot.
Okay.
See, you have to first consider, we have discussed that from Africa, anatomical modern human came along the sea, and that was known as Great Coastal Migration. That was not by ship, that was on foot.
Okay.
And similarly, following the submersion of the Bengal-Myanmar coast about 12 to 15,000 years ago, or 12 to 13,000 years ago, during the early post-glacial period, when these people are traveling, they are following the same route along which the anatomical modern human had come on foot along the coast. So, first migration was on foot along the coast. That gives us the places where these early genetic identities, if R1 Bravo had spread, then it will fall in that coastal on foot sea route or trekking sea route. The sea route you cannot, one is coastal trek route. At the earliest stage, when they had no proper ship, they were traveling along the coast but on foot. So that is one period when they were traveling on foot. When they are coming back, initially they were coming back on foot. That is how they reached Himalayas. Ship won't take them to Himalayas. So when you are detecting something along the Trans-Himalayan route, obviously they had come on foot. And only at a later date, they started coming by ship.
Oh.
So that is, by definition, is actually sea route, when they are coming by ship. But the early migration during the post-glacial period, which they are traveling on foot but along the coast, that is along the sea, all right, but that you cannot actually say as sea route, along the coast, or coastal route is a better term, and that is, so let me complete that route, the sea route, you cannot use that term for everybody, even when the migration is along the sea. So that initial, till some period they were actually traveling on foot only. But when they were traveling along the sea, that we should refer as coastal trek route. Actually, we have to be very clear about which form of which route of migration occurred during which period. When the first group came from Africa to India, obviously they walked. Similarly, immediately after the post-glacial period, when the Bengal-Myanmar coastal region started submerging, the first two groups, let us say O haplogroup and B haplogroup, they walked along the coast, along the sea, and at that time also they are actually traveling on foot. And they reached Mediterranean region, Africa, and even Black Sea region, but on foot. So that is another period. Then when they are coming back, which we are referring to in this book as reverse migration, during the initial period, again they are coming on foot. That is why we find them in the Indus Valley civilization when they are actually returning on foot. And similarly, we find them along the Himalayas, pivoting Mount Kailash. It is only possible to reach Himalayas when they are coming on foot. So they are settling in Indian Himalayas, that is Himachal, Uttarakhand, Ladakh, and then Nepal, Bhutan, Tibet, Eastern, Northeast India, when they are traveling on foot. Only at a later date, they started coming by ship. We should use the term sea route only for them. That possibly started 3,500 years ago when Pharaoh Hatshepsut established a sea route from Red Sea region to west coast of India. And finally, they were coming directly to the Bay of Bengal by ship, which is actually recorded in Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, as well as Ptolemy's map is drawn on the basis of this sea route when they were actually coming by ship from Red Sea directly to Bay of Bengal, or maybe further on the east. That is sea route. Hatshepsut's 3,500-year-old again sea route, but prior to that, all the migration used to take place on foot.
Okay, sir. Sir, since you spoke about Pali language, I just want to bring in the discussion of languages which was used in the ancient time during the migration or during the ancient times. Elaborate to us about the languages which were used during the ancient times.
Another very interesting but quite a complex subject. Firstly, we, as I have mentioned, a sort of transformation or refinement of civilization was going on Bengal-Myanmar coast, where the post-glacial period genetic identities originated. They lived on the Bengal-Myanmar coast for 10,000 years. During this period, there was continuous refinement of language, culture, religion, and religion in the sense very rudimentary form of religion, and even skill. So they started cutting stone and all at that time only. Now, let us concentrate which are the languages which possibly formed there, and along with which genetic identity these languages reach different distant lands. Whatever I could assess or I could gather is that this continuous refinement of language includes possibly the earliest language, we can say Mundari language, that is Austroasiatic, which was used by the Austroasiatics. Proto-Bengali is close to that, and then came Pali, Prakrito. Pali and Prakrito possibly are more or less of the same period, and then came Sanskrit, then we find Chaurjapad and present-day Bengali language. Now, each genetic identity, first migration was O haplogroup. They possibly took Mundari, Pali-Prakrito to the Mediterranean region where Palestine is now located, or Palestine. Finally, when this language became very, very grammatically correct and refined, that language was possibly spoken Sanskrit. Now, when the R1 Bravo territory is submerging, they are migrating through Trans-Himalayan route. In this case, they definitely migrated through Trans-Himalayan route and reached Eastern Europe. We find R1 Bravo Alpha concentration in this route only. They had scattered distribution in other areas, but my assessment is, my opinion is, they actually migrated, pivoting Mount Kailash to Eastern Europe along Trans-Himalayan migration route. They had taken oral Sanskrit or spoken Sanskrit. Now, till this time, that is 4,500 years ago, 4,000 to 5,000 years ago, all these languages were in spoken form. So, we have to consider that initially from India to the Mediterranean region, these people migrated with spoken language. Pali in one direction and Sanskrit in other direction. And when they are coming back, we find that they are coming back with script, and then the languages are getting scripted or getting written in script form. Now let us see that we find 16 Mahajanapadas forming in India. By my opinion, actually they reached this 16 Mahajanapada period is 3,500 years ago, when they reached from Red Sea region to west coast of India, and then they got distributed along Dakhinapad and Uttarapad all over Central Indian territory, that is West India, Central India, North India, and in the Himalayas also. Two Mahajanapadas were in the Himalayas, that is Gandhara and Kamboja. Now, they were in all probability Pali speakers, because we get this 16 Mahajanapada mentioned in the Buddhist and Jain scriptures written in Pali language. So, in all probability, these 16 Mahajanapadas were Pali speakers. And that is confirmed because we see that even Ashoka, when he is writing his edicts, Ashoka edicts were also written in Pali language. So that more or less suggests that till 3rd century BC, majority of India understood Pali. In fact, Pali was the most popular language. Obviously, Ashoka would write in a language which is understood by the majority. So here is, but as I mentioned, it appears to me that this is a reverse migration of the Indian origin community. When they are establishing 16 Mahajanapadas, they are writing in Pali in script. But we have to keep in mind that these Pali speakers had traveled much, much earlier, maybe 8 or 10,000 years ago, from Bengal-Myanmar coast to the Mediterranean region with oral language. I mean, the Pali, Prakrito and this Mundari language. So they had traveled much earlier with oral language, and when they are coming back, it is getting scripted. Same thing is happening with Sanskrit. 6,000 years ago, they are traveling with R1 alpha haplogroup across Kailash to Eastern Europe with spoken Sanskrit. And when they are coming back, it is getting recorded. Now, we find that 5th, 6th century BC, we have scripted form of Rig Veda, 4 Vedas, compilation of Vedas and Mahabharatas, and this in written form. So we have to consider that this is the time when the script is coming back, or Indian origin people are coming back with script, and now they can actually write, and things are getting, so far it was in spoken form. Let us say Rig Veda per se was in spoken form till that period. Mahabharata, Ramayana was in spoken form, but now that the script arrives, it is Indian origin people started writing in script at this time. So that is about language. And one thing I would like to share, that when the O haplogroup actually went, they went with Mundari, Proto-Bengali, Pali, and when they are coming back, those languages are getting referred to as Tibeto-Burman, Austroasiatic. Now, Tibeto-Burman and Austroasiatic are actually reverse migration early languages which had traveled from Bengal Myanmar coast to the Mediterranean region. So we have to place them together with the genetic. That genetic migration is taking place in this way, initially traveling from here to Mediterranean region, or from India to Mediterranean region, and then coming back. Same thing is happening with language. Initially they had taken some early languages which had formed on the Bengal Myanmar coast, and when they are coming back, we are identifying them, but we are unable to explain where from this Tibeto-Burman and why Tibeto-Burman language has some similarity with the Chinese territory or Southeast Asia, because the same people who are coming back from Mediterranean region are not only settling only in India, but they're traveling to southern China, they are settling in Southeast Asia. So this Southeast Asia and Northeast India is to some extent they have some similarity. That is not because they have traveled from one place to the other, but both of them are reverse migration community which are coming back from the Mediterranean region. And interestingly, at that time, Indian culture is also reaching Southeast Asia. Not only that, we find Ramayana very popular in Northeast India. Southeast Asia is because those people are coming back and settling not only along the coast of India and Northeast India, but they are settling in Southeast Asia also. And that is the reason we find some similarity. Similarly, they had settled not only in the Himalayas from Nepal, Bhutan, Tibeto-Burman speakers, Nepal, Bhutan, and Northeast India, but actually that language is going to southern China also. And similarly, when they are coming back by boat, the same language speakers are settling in Burma. So that is why this same language is referred to now as Tibeto-Burman, but they are coming by different route and at different period by different mode of migration. They had reached Tibet on foot and they are reaching Burma by sea. So all these very complex things I have given lot of maps, and that is why this book has become a little expensive, because it has got lot of color maps, lot of photographs, maybe 700-800 photographs to establish what we are saying is based on evidences present both in Indian subcontinent as well as in the Mediterranean and the Red Sea region. When we attempt to establish that convincingly, we had to give lot of photographs and lot of maps and in color form for people to really get convinced or take it seriously. That has made the book little more expensive, but I hope this sort of podcast will make this subject known to the rest of the community, which is one of the purpose.
Definitely, sir. Sir, I think you have mentioned with pictures a lot of similarities between the gods present here and there and the animal symbols which has been used and the deities. So I think how did we collaborate, sir? As you said, I have seen the pictures also, and I have seen your presentation in your previous recorded podcast also, sir. So can you just explain how the god similarities has been there from this region, because this has been over centuries and centuries ago. So how did it still remain over there, sir?
Well, this is a very interesting question which we do not discuss. First thing is, we see these deity images, these animal symbols randomly, not only all over the Indian subcontinent, but in all the ancient civilizations. Now we have to understand what is the meaning of each animal symbol, what is the meaning of each deity image, where from it may have spread. So these are the languages used by the Indian origin people during the pre-script period. It is not that they were not recording anything, they were not recording in script. Instead, they were using this sort of pictorial images. when they are, each animal symbol actually represents a fraternity. Naga fraternity, Matsho or Mean fraternity, Koch or Kurmo fraternity, like that, Bag fraternity, Hathi fraternity. So each animal symbol represents a human fraternity. So instead of writing that I am Tamil, I am Bengali, I am Punjabi, I am Gujarati, they were using animal symbol to represent their ethnic identity. So this is a pre-script language which was used by the Indian origin communities wherever they established ancient civilizations. You will find a fantastic similarity between the animal symbols used in India, and even today they are used with all our deities, and the same animal symbols, quite often same, though there is some transformation that we can also discuss, that more or less same, like Naga symbol is, this Nag symbol is found with all our deities. Kali, Durga, Shiva, Vishnu. You go to Egypt and see that Nag symbol is all over. So here is an opportunity to associate that the one fraternity during pre-script period identified themselves with this Nag symbol as their ethnic symbol, and they have reached Egypt, and whatever they constructed there, they have signatured with that Nag symbol. And you see the Naga temples, the temples of Egypt, let us say Edfu temple, Horus temple there, you will find Nag symbol so prominently displayed on top. In every temple in Egypt, you will find Nag symbol used at random. Similarly, avian symbol. In fact, in the Horus symbol, Horus temple of Edfu, you will find that Horus is associated with a falcon. That is a mythical eagle. Here also, if we say that this Horus and Hori of India, they are transformation of one deity into different civilizations, then we find Hori here associated with Gorur, which is also nothing but a mythical eagle. And there, Horus is associated, quite often Horus is actually shown as having an eagle face or eagle head. Now, these are the things which gives us an idea to associate that probably this language, this animal symbol language actually traveled with the Indian origin fraternities when they established other civilizations, and they embossed it in those archaeological structures which has remained there. Now they are not using these animal symbols except India. Nobody else is using these animal symbols with their deities. But they have remained because Indian origin people created those structures. They have created their deities. They have associated those animal symbols with their specific deities. And that has remained in the archaeological structures and in their paintings, which we are now discovering that they had created this 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. They were Indian origin people. You know, in Egypt we find use of lotus images at random. You know, they had created lotus on the temples on the top of the columns, very, very commonly. Now, I was after them to find a genuine lotus, whether lotus grows in Egypt or not. I could not find any naturally growing lotus there in Egypt, whereas majority of their temple has lotus. Now you see, if those artists were compelled to create lotus image to establish their context, Saraswati and Lokhi is always shown as sitting on lotus or lotus throne. Now, we can't create a Lokhi image or Saraswati image in whichever civilization we go without associating her with lotus. Same thing happened. Now, not only that, even the artists who created those lotus images were possibly Indians, because unless you have seen a lotus, It is very difficult for them to actually imagine a flower and create that in stone there without even seeing it. So even the artists were Indian. That's what I mean, my analysis goes like this: who created this lotus images or these falcon images with a specific deity, and we have comparable deities here when it is always associated with lotus. So there, when they created, let us say, I feel that Isis is nothing but Sri. Sri is the other name of Lakshmi. Now, Lakshmi is always associated with lotus. Now, in Egypt also we find Isis is always associated with lotus. So this is how, and then comes Kali. Kali also is, when it manifested, there was an article by Wilford in Asiatic Researchers published in 1794, where he is specifically writing that 183-page article, and the title of that is Nile River of Today was actually known as Kali River. And he is getting this from our ancient texts, Skanda Puran and Padma Puran. So it is not that we are trying to associate Indian civilization with Egyptian civilization. Even the Europeans did at some stage during the pre-Macaulay period. You have to understand their approach to present India completely transformed after they had sent Macaulay to change our syllabus and convert our syllabus or follow up. Since then we are following European syllabus, to be precise British syllabus, and then our education system or our concepts went completely. I mean, since then it has become completely distorted. So these deities are, and then we find that when we go to Greece, we find that the earliest deity there is Athena, and then they are confirming that actually Athena was black to begin with. Now a white community worshipping a black deity is rather unusual. So that is happening because the deity was dark complexion, and that is why she was known as Black Athena. Same thing is happening in the rest of Europe, where Black Madonna is the early deity. Before she becomes, let us say, Mother Mary, and even Christ becomes fair complexion. Before that, they were dark complexion. At least not fair. So this is how there is an opportunity. Of course, unless you visit and see by yourself what has happened in Greece and Turkey and Egypt, you will never imagine this. So that is how I thought, whatever is my budget, I have to actually physically travel, collect those evidences, read those civilization, whatever is possible, and then only compare. Otherwise, this comparison becomes very vague and theoretical. So I could actually find a lot of similarities, unimaginable. I went with some concept and then I found 10 times more. And I could manage to photograph them, and that is what has happened in this book. I've made an attempt to publish as many photographs to establish my point. In the process, the book has become expensive. So anyway, at least it is getting recorded. It is becoming documented now.
Understood, sir. Sir, the process of reverse migration and the routes which we used for the reverse migration, because we talked the migration and the routes used, and so please explain in short about the process of reverse migration and the routes. What kind of routes they have followed, or what kind of routes they have discovered, sir?
Okay. Firstly, now you have to understand that India is possibly the most diverse country in the world. Probably its diversity is much more than other continents. How it has happened? It has happened because lot of reverse migration community from different region have returned to India over a period of time. Let us say this reverse migration started 4,000 years ago or 4,002. Definitely when they are coming back through Indus Valley civilization, because Indus Valley civilization collapsed at 1300 BC. So definitely they were, and we find evidences of both onward and reverse migration in Indus Valley civilization. So definitely this reverse migration started 4,000 years ago. And then it continued till a very recent time, because what we see is, let us say, Sun Temple of Konark, that has definite features of African origin communities, in the sense To begin with, it's a sun temple. Sun god was possibly not very popular god of Eastern India. To have the largest temple here of dedicated to sun god. Now, and then it has got giraffe images and all. So by my year, that this reverse migration continued till very late period, maybe 500-600 years ago, if not later. And it started further. There were very specific reasons for reverse migration. That is why we find reverse migration of different nature at different period. And then, because it continued over a long period, initial reverse migration is through land route, and then at a later date by sea route. So, and then another very interesting thing is reverse migration from Red Sea region and reverse migration from Eastern Europe. As I mentioned, that in all probability, reverse migration from Red Sea region and southern Mediterranean region, they were Pali speakers. So they settle in a territory. We can identify their migration path and their distribution, why they settle in different places in India. And then reverse migration from Eastern Europe, that is Sanskrit speakers community who wrote a lot of Sanskrit documents, not only scriptures but other documents also. Their reverse migration is from Europe. So you have to understand reverse migration by different, what are the new languages which came. But incidentally, why it went unnoticed is because Indian origin people were traveling to, let us say, Red Sea region with a particular language and deities, and when they came back, they were worshipping the same deities and probably were speaking in the same language but a little different dialect. So that got very easily absorbed within the existing Indian civilization. Same thing happened when they came back with Sanskrit language, written Sanskrit from Eastern Europe. They were worshipping our deities. They were worshipping, they were using our language, but a little different, but you can understand that their root is same. So that is how, and on top of that, it will become a very complex discussion that some part of India remained unoccupied. They had settled essentially on those regions. So there were no conflict even for the area of settlement. They did not disturb anybody or displace anybody and settle there. They settled in vacant regions like Ganga Valley or the Himalayas was vacant. During glacial period, the snow of Himalayas forms and no snow is melting, so all the rivers become dry. So entire North Indian Himalayas becomes devoid of any flowing river and so unsuitable for human settlement, and so it becomes completely vacant during glacial period. And when they are coming back during post-glacial period, this region is available to them to settle without displacing anybody. So there was no conflict even for the settlement. Territory. Not that they displaced and then invariably there would have been some conflict in case they were actually displacing people. But there was no conflict because they were essentially settling in the areas which were vacant since the glacial period.
Understood, sir. Sir, we have spoke a lot about migration and reverse migration and the routes in detail actually. So let us also speak about the present day Muslim dominated Egypt and the recent findings about the Egyptian civilization also, sir, because since you told Indians have been migrated to Egypt and the reverse migration also happened, from where did a usual question arises, from where did Egypt become a Muslim dominant country as well? So give us a glimpse about what happened in the recent years or in the recent centuries, and what are the recent findings of this Egyptian civilization, sir?
Well, this is a very complex question. Now, firstly, you have to understand who established these ancient civilizations. As you are repeatedly mentioning about Egypt, we will include Egypt. Who who established Sumer, Mesopotamia, Egyptian civilization and Greek civilization? And then why did all of them collapse almost at the same period and without any reason? Now, this is a fantastic subject. Why did they collapse? And unfortunately or mysteriously, we can't find any definite reason for any of the civilization. Why did they collapse? Now, my view is, for various reasons, Indian origin people settled there and who established these civilizations felt uncomfortable at different period. Firstly, 3000 years ago they felt uncomfortable because essentially they were matriarchal community and patriarchal communities started forming there. So the matriarchal community started coming back. That is why we find 9 forms of Durga coming back to India, and which are known as Nava Durga. 9 communities are coming from different direction. All of them are worshipping a particular deity. They are calling that deity as Durga, but that Durga is now in 9 different forms because each form formed in different region with local transformation or little bit of different physical feature, and the community worshipping that little different. But we find Nava Durga. Now that was the first reason that when the patriarchal community started emerging in the Mediterranean region. Next reason was during the formation of Christianity. A lot of people were troubled and they were called pagan and they were humiliated, and sometimes they were not permitted to follow their religion. It may appear their religion, that is slaughtering of animal and animal sacrifice, that is, and worshipping devis or images may appear very funny to these communities, but Indian origin people were very intently, they wanted to follow their religion, their customs, their rituals. So they decided to come back when Christianity originated there. And the third reason is when the Islam originated there. Again, same thing happened. This time they even troubled the Christians also. But there was another wave of reverse migration. So there were definite reasons for these reverse migrations. Now comes this Egyptian territory. Now, when the Indian origin people returned to India, because they had established Egyptian civilization, so they had created their images, their deity images. There were nobody to worship those deities, so those temples became deserted. There were nobody to even identify which was this deity, so even the local people could not know that. Now, when the Indian origin people came back here, gradually those people who were settled in Arabia started settling there because that became available to them. So obviously they took this opportunity, and Arabic language, Islam faith, that started spreading in. But I personally feel that has happened, that Arabic language spread there and the Muslim communities spread there only when the Indian origin people returned, or it is possible that only those who remained there, they possibly accepted this language and this way, or people from this Islamic territory and Arabic spoken territory had come and occupied because it became vacant, it was available to them. So that is my explanation why gradually it became like this, and we find very funny records in the Mediterranean region that some people disappeared from there. Some language got completely obsolete in the sense collapsed. I mean, those languages are dead languages there. So that is what suggests us that actually, how can 10 lost tribes of Israel, this term 10 lost tribes, a tribe can move from place A to place B, but it is traceable. People will know that my uncle has gone that side. But why then this happened or got recorded in the Western scripture records that 10 lost tribes of Israel disappeared from Israel? What happened? By then, now you imagine that 2000 years back, this periplus of the Erythraean Sea and the Ptolemy's map clearly indicates that there was a sea route from Red Sea to India. right up to Mediterranean, right up to Bay of Bengal. Now, what happened? They sat on those boats which were coming back from there, and it appeared to them that they got lost. They actually traveled en masse from there because they were troubled so much. And they came back and settled in India. Then Israel is finding in Mizoram that these people are one of the 10 lost tribes of India, is because now if we arrange that migration path, we find them at this end. So we have to understand that a lot of people were coming back for various reasons, basically for, let us say, religious persecution, and they were coming back to India and settling at different places. So we find new people coming here with little different dialect of the language they were spoken. I am sure they were actually speaking Indian origin languages there till they actually returned. So all these new languages formed there because the people with the Indian origin language had actually come back to India, and then only these new languages formed. So they in those regions. So that is the reason why we find is Arabic language in Egypt today. And but interestingly, these new people, they were not interested in worshipping those in those temples, and they could not even identify who are these deities. So that gives that these new people were completely not associated with this temple and with this culture. So that almost confirms. That is why all those Egyptian temples got buried, and nobody bothered to go into their ancestral memorials, which the European scholars or Egyptologists discovered with great difficulty very recently, because local people were not interested. Whose ancestral memorial is there? We are not interested, because they were not. They were Indian origin people who had come back. They with so much of care had created those structures. They with so much of care had worshipped their own deities, establishing their own deities there.
Understood, sir. Sir, I think we have discussed a lot about India in Egypt, reverse migration, deities used, and a lot of topics have been discussed for a very long time, I hope so. Sir, I would like to end this discussion or this podcast by asking you about the two favorite books of mine, actually. One is Andaman, and the other one is on the Northeast, actually, because I saw your book. There has been a lot of pictorial representations, which was too stunning, actually. Give us a glimpse about Andaman tribes and Andaman, which you have discussed, and you have also mentioned about the submerge of Andaman archipelago as well. And give us a small glimpse about both these regions, sir.
Well, though we call Andaman and Nicobar in one breath, but actually only when you go into the details you will understand Andaman and Nicobar are two different archipelagos. Their biological origin, the trees which are there in Andaman are completely different with what is there in Nicobar, because Nicobar got connected with the, Myanmar. Nicobar got connected with the Indonesian territory, and Andaman got connected by the Burmese territory. So what we get in Andaman is Indo-Burmese, and what we get in Nicobar is Malayan, Indo-Malayan. Now comes people. Andaman, this Negrito tribes, because Andaman gets physically connected with Bengal-Myanmar coast periodically during every glacial period. Negrito people could enter. Actually, who were traveling with this African origin anatomical modern humans could enter Andaman, and now we have detected M31 and M32 mtDNA haplogroups there. So we have very little idea about how Andaman received anatomical modern human. So then that gave me an idea to think about this Bengal-Myanmar coast. That is the only explanation to explain how did Aboriginal tribes enter or present now in Andaman. So unless you know this, you will miss the most important thing, that we Indians, we have one of the rare species, or few rare species in the world today. They are clearly pre-glacial period genetic identities, that is the Andaman Aboriginal tribes. And then we have to think about how did they enter. Then comes the concept of this Bengal Myanmar coast, because we are not seriously considering these events of our Indian prehistorical period. We are not understanding where these post-glacial period genetic identities form, what are the evidences, where do we search for those evidences. We are not understanding, because this period remains completely undiscussed in India and abroad. Forget about what Harvard is doing or Oxford is doing or Cambridge is doing, because that is not their territory. Why, as Indians, we will not even consider that? Let us decide how did these people enter there. Let us see why we have all three, that is R1 alpha, R1 bravo and O haplogroup in Bengal region. If Bengal Myanmar coastal shelf, which occurs during glacial period, submerges, then they are supposed to come and settle here, and that is where we are finding them. Now we are finding them, that has been established, that's clearly available in the maps, available in Wikipedia or Google, that where are the, so we find all of them there. So there is no surprise in that, but nobody is explaining that, nobody is discussing that. So if you don't discuss, you will never understand, or never you will be able to claim that here is the territory which suits all the preconditions that post-glacial period genetic identities originated here. And then if they have traveled, obviously they have taken the culture and their deities and their language. Now always there is a funny discussion that we find something in Europe and something in India. So whether it has traveled from east to west or from west to east. Now Harvard and Oxford possibly is more interested in establishing it has traveled from west to east. They are more interested in establishing that Sanskrit language / Indo-European languages come from west to east. Analyze what is the available genetic data. If it confirms something else, then we have to explain. Now we know best about Andaman. Why did I write a book on Andaman? Why did I go into the details and understand? Fortunately, I was posted there for 3 years, so I got a wonderful opportunity to really understand what is this territory, archipelago, and where are these people settled, how could have they come, and actually I started working on this migration path since then, 20 years back. So that I am convinced that I have fairly good idea about these territories. And now in Nicobar, who have come and settled there? From which direction? Why are they speaking Mon Khmer? Why are they Indo-Mongoloid? They are not Negritos. They are not dark complexion African origin people. First they are African origin, but they are very recent people. They must have settled there 5,000 years, 3,000 years ago, and they must have come by sea route only, by ship. So where from they could have come with this Indo-Mongoloid feature and Mon Khmer language? Probably they have not come from Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia population has possibly come from the Mediterranean region. They are reverse migration Indian origin people. They have settled in Nicobar as well as in Southeast Asia. So that is why there is a connectivity, ethnic connectivity or similarity. But we have to understand what was the path. So all these territories which remains little known territories of India, I had to go into the details, and like Northeast you have mentioned, it's a gold mine. Unless we understand what has happened in Northeast, we will never understand our connectivity with the Red Sea region and Mediterranean region. There are evidences all over the Indian subcontinent, but there are such blatant evidences, blatant scientific evidences, archaeological evidence, genetic evidence, and it is so blatant. You have to explain how long our historians keep quiet when the archaeologists are confirming that this 6th century temple is Hellenistic art or Greek art. Historians are quiet because it is not in recorded form. They are not finding anything in record, but somebody has to arrange the entire history, not based of only history, not based on only archaeology, but they have to compile information from all subjects to form an idea. And then only it will become a meaningful description, even when the historians refuse to accept that because it is not recorded. We are talking about a territory where those people were not recording anything. They don't have recorded things, but they have evidences. These evidences are genetic evidence. The evidences are archaeological evidence. And we find there is a temple in Tripura which is known as Choturdas Devata temple. We find those deities have come from Greco-Roman territory because we find those 14 gods equivalent in Greek and the Roman civilization or pantheon. So, you have to accept all these evidences together. Whether it is available in written form or not is immaterial. We have to go beyond history. Not only during the prehistorical period, but in territories where nothing is recorded. But it does not mean not many people. No people lived there. We had such fantastic refined record of refined civilization existing in Northeast India. Today they are called tribes, and I consider we have to seriously consider that whether it is secondary primitivism, because there are records that they were refined people. There are archaeological records that there are ruins of big forts. Nobody is discussing that because they don't go to Northeast India. They have no clue what is there. And then you have to collectively collect evidence, archaeological evidence, genetic evidence, linguistic evidence, cultural evidence, and then you will be able to form where from these people has come. I think
yes, sir. We have spoke a lot in various topics, and thank you so much, sir. It was an eye-opening for me also, and I hope all your works should be a national treasure, I would say, because these kinds of works have been never done. If I'm not wrong, I have never heard India in Egypt as a topic before researching about you as well. So thank you so much for your wonderful time and your wonderful podcast, sir. I hope we should do more of a podcast like this in future, and I hope we should do, and you should also explore more of the Indian region and present to us in a detailed manner. So thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of you.